All right, two things. First, I was having trouble copying stuff over from the PDF, and I don't know if you did or not, or had any trouble, so I also gave you this in a Word format. All right, the updated one in a Word format, so you've got that. All right. And second, again, I'm not going that far in this today. All right, we will go further tomorrow, and I'll show you what we're going to be going over at the end of this lecture. What I'm going to ask that you do when we're done, there's still some of you have not turned in the Chapter 4 test, so you can work on that. But for the rest of you, either continue reading this or start reading the book. Because as soon as we finish this, we're going to go through the one for database first, but it's very quick. And then we're jumping right into Chapter 7. So I'm supposing that by the time we do that, whatever day that is, whether it's late this week or early next week, that you will have read Chapter 7. All right? So the author mentions here, it says, to tell the entity framework to use your initializer class, you need to add an element to the entity framework element in the web.config. Well, before we do that, let's look at this. All right, you may or may not know this. I don't know. But if you look here, there are two web config files that are in here. In fact, when you create an ASP.NET project, you get two web config files. This one right here, if for some reason instead of creating a GUI application, you create a console app, that'll be called machine.config. Not that that's a big thing one way or the other. But what I want you to understand is this one right here, this web config, these are your settings for the entire project. The other one that's inside of here, right there, notice if I close views, it's gone. All right, why did I show you that? This inner web config, that is for just the views. So if you've got something special you want to use just for the views. All right, maybe you want to set up a special namespace or a special area where they can all, share stuff or whatever. All right, but almost always, the one that you're going to end up using is going to be this one. All right, the one at the very bottom here. And that's what they want us to use now. So the author says to tell this, we want to go down to our entity framework, which I know is in here someplace, but I don't remember where it is, so it's right there. Okay, it's down near the bottom, and they want us to add this context statement that you see right here. Before I add that, because it's kind of pushed around, it looks funky for lack of better words in here, I'm going to put it here and paste. That makes it a little easier to see. All right. Now, you don't have to do that, but I just would like to go over some of the stuff that's in here. Whoops. So the context type, notice what it says. This is saying what the name of our context file is and where that file is located. So it's showing us the namespace. It's saying under the project ContosoUniversity, under the folder DAL, it's there and it's called school context. Next, it tells the name of the project, which is right there. All right. Then we're telling it where that initializer file is. That's the one we did before the break. That is again under ContosoUniversity.dal, but this time instead of being called school context, it's called school initializer, and again, it's underneath that particular project. All right. So I'm going to just grab this stuff that's in here, and they tell us to take it and put it right under the beginning of the entity framework. So I'm just going to paste it right there. All right. Now again, if you don't like my explanations, I'm sure the ones in the book are better, or the handout, whatever you want to call it. So they explain here in more depth and breadth of coverage than I just did, all right, what's going on there? Afterwards, the author says, the application is now set up so that when you access the database for the first time, basically by running the program, the entity framework will compare the database to the model. And if there is a difference, as it says, it'll go and drop the database and recreate it. As I mentioned to you earlier, and I'm saying it again, you never want to turn something like that on in an actual application setting. You never want to take the chance. If you got a database with your customers in it, could you imagine if for some reason Rankin lost all of your information? It may not sound like a big thing now. What if that happened, and it happened right when people were, the beginning of the semester? You could sit there and say, yeah, I signed up and I paid, because it might, who knows, it might look like no one had paid. All right, and unless they back the system up, they could be in a world of hurt. All right. Bottom of the page here, the author talks about LocalDB. That's what we're going to use here. Why do we want to use LocalDB? Well, the point is, we don't have to. But please look up on the screen here. I'm going to see if I can get both of these in here as much as possible. LocalDB is installed by default with Visual Studio, which is, I think, why the author's using it. I don't know. But notice it's a lightweight version of SQL Server Express database engine. The author at least claims it's easy to install and configure. Couldn't be any easier to install if you get it automatically anyway. Okay. It runs in a special execution or a special area of SQL Server Express that allows you to work with databases as MDF files. In fact, it's even possible you can have them saved into your app database folder. We're not going to go through that right now, though. So, as the author says here, typically SQL Server Express is not used, all right, for web applications production-wise. LocalDB does not work very well with IIS, which is if you are taking something and basically trying to move it, to another server. That's a typical Windows server. I don't believe there's a problem working with LocalDB and Azure. We're going to find out. All right. So the author says, in this tutorial, we'll work with LocalDB. So again, we've already got the web.config file open. And what we want to do is it says here, right before the app settings, we want to add this connection string. Again, it's a little funky on the page here, so before we go over and look at it, I'm going to clean it up a little by putting it over here. All right. Now, a couple things about this. Please look, because these are mistakes everybody makes. All right. This, again, is our connection string. The name of that string is we defined that before as school context. This is what's important. We're letting the system know that our data source is LocalDB. All right. And the initial catalog, so in other words, when it creates this database for us, it'll call it ContosoUniversity 1. I may already have that. I don't remember if I changed the name or not, so I'm just going to call mine, I'm going to call it ContosoUniversity 2. I might even have that, but I don't think I do. All right. The integrated security that's here, this says we're using the built-in Windows security mechanisms. All right. And when you work with this, you put the provider name, and that's basically the way you set it. System.data.sql client. So I'm going to grab all this, copy it to the clipboard, go back into my web config, try to find app settings, which is right near the top. Right before that, I'm going to hit enter and paste that in. Now, again, this isn't that important, but please look on the screen because sometimes it drives people a little nuts. But if you look right here, try to narrow that way down. There we go. Right here, that's legal. See that? Because I'm outside of the double quotes. But everything else up until the provider name, so I can do it like this. That's legal. But I have done this before, where I break like in the middle of here or something. You can't do that. And you don't get the error until you try to run the program. And the error you get is obtuse, meaning doesn't really explain what the heck went wrong. All right? I mean, a lot of people just like to leave that in one line, period. All right? So again, if you don't like my explanation, there's much more here. Okay? All right. Next, as it says, you'll create a web page to display data. We're by no means done after this, but we've started. It says the process of requesting data automatically triggers the creation of the database. Did everybody hear that? So we're going to come in and create a controller, and it'll automatically create the views for us because of the way we're going. We're not going to create an empty controller. We're going to create a controller with Entity Framework that has the views in there for us. And then when we run that, it'll automatically note, oh, there's no database by that name, so it'll create it. All right? And that's what the author says in here. So as it says there, I'm just going to follow the author's lead here. All right? So we're going to right mouse click on the controllers folder, select add. And in fact, before we do that, if you've already started, you've started. If you haven't started, again, let's do a file, save all, and let's do a build on your menu, build solution. Why? Because basically what that does is it sends a signal, for lack of better words, to the system that we're about to start using our models. All right? It may not work if you do that. I've had it work and not work by not building first. So it's just a build solution. All right, I think there's a shortcut. You can hit F6. There might even be another one. I don't know what it is. All right, so going back to here, I think I can close this at least for now. I got a lot of stuff open here, so I'm going to close a few of them. I'll leave those open, and I don't need that either. All right. So the author says we want to right mouse click on our controllers folder. Remember, we do have a controller in there right now. We've got that home controller, which we got by default, and it's not doing very much right now. So I'm going to right mouse click on this, click add, choose controller. Again, we've always chosen empty. We will do empty when we are doing the project for that's out of the book. When we do our own project, we will choose the same one that I'm going to choose right now, which is this one. MVC5 controller with views using Entity Framework. All right, so I'm going to click that and click Add. All right. It says in the Add Controller dialog box, make the following selections and then choose Add. For the model class, choose Student, which, since it's alphabetized, is at the bottom. For the data context class, choose school context. Only one in there, which makes it easier. For the controller name, they ask you to singularize it and not call it students controller, but student controller. And then they say you can leave all the defaults for generate views, referencing script library, using a layout page. But before I click add, you should now understand one of the things this is doing right here. This is creating one of those strongly typed views. So I think we're going to have that at model statement at the top. This is the class that we're using as our data context class. We are telling it to generate the views for us automatically. We are telling it to reference the script libraries, so if it needs any JavaScript and or jQuery, make that available. And we're telling it to use a layout page. Since we didn't specify one, it's going to use that underscore layout.cshtml. So if you notice in here, right now, I do not have a folder inside of my views that is called student. And in my controllers, I do not have a student controller. After I click add here, if you did this, like I said, and if for some reason it fails, I'm hoping this one doesn't. Sure it's taken a while. But if it fails, make sure you've done the build solution. Doesn't usually take this long. I'm going to see if mine does. Or if it just spins here forever. No, it should come up fairly quickly, and there shouldn't be an error. There, mine came up. Now, you say that yours had an error. I don't know what the error is. But again, did you do that build solution before we started? Yeah. All right, and you saved. Because what the suggestion is that you do another save all, do another build, maybe rebuild solution, and then try it again. All right? So what do I have in here? Well, look what's in the controller, please, if you would. Because this is stuff that we have not seen before. This is, for lack of better words, what's going to create the database for us. See that line that's in blue? We're telling it to instantiate the database context. And then here, we've got an action result, we've got index, and all that should do is it should show us, that should show us all of our students. Look on the screen. Does that make sense? That line of code that you see in blue should show us a listing of all our students. Then we've got details. I want to run through these with you before we go and look at the actual CSHTML files. Look right here, please, everybody. This is details. Notice, even though we should pass in an ID, if we don't, it won't break. See that? That's what that question mark does. But if we passed in, we're asking for details. That's expecting an individual ID. If we don't give it one, we'll get a bad request error. On the other hand, if we do pass in an ID, but the ID doesn't exist, that'll be this null, so it'll return not found. So if I've got 10 students and I ask for student 50,000, there won't be one. So it'll give me not found. All right, but if I try to do the details without specifying a student, it'll give me a bad request. All right. Then this should allow us to create. Okay, and please look, because this is stuff that's going to have to start making sense to you. What do I mean? Well, almost always when you do a create that's a get, remember that's a getter, you pass nothing in. This line of code right here, this line here, and this line here must be different. This is the get. So for lack of better words, that's going to bring the form up for us. This is the set, or the post, I should say. That's after we click the create button. All right? So what is it doing in here? It's checking all those fields that we put in. So, for instance, if it asks for a numeric field or a date field, and I type in hello, it's going to break. If it asks for a numeric field, and I left it blank, it would break. All right? If all I had in there were strings, and I didn't have any data annotations, and I left it all blank, that would work. All right? And it works the same way almost that we just saw in here with create. I'm sorry, with the details. So edit what? It's expecting you to put in a record you want to edit. If you don't, again, bad request. If you get down to here, you did put in the number of a record you want to edit. But if there was no student ID based on the number you put in, you'll get a not found. Otherwise, it'll return the information. All right. This is the edit here, the get, which is just going to bring that up. This is the edit that, again, after you click the button that says you want to make the change. Same kind of thing we looked at before. The key thing always in here is this. Save changes. That's writing it out to the database. Then finally we've got the delete. That's going to bring up the, basically the delete dialog that says, are you sure you want to delete that one? And then here is the actual delete that's done. You'll notice if you look in here, some of these will say validate anti-forgery token. We haven't really talked at all about security, but those are built-in Microsoft, that is a built-in Microsoft security annotation, which will, for lack of better words, go in and try to check and make sure bad stuff ain't going to happen. Now, that's not put very well. But tomorrow we're going to talk a little bit about blacklisting and whitelisting. And hopefully some of the stuff will make a little bit more sense then. And that's it. The disposing basically just says give up the resources when we're all done. All right. Again, you don't like Jeff's words? Take a look on here. It's page 24, as the author is explaining what's going on there. All right. He talks about, again, as I mentioned, that's going to, for lack of better words, create your database for you. There's the to list. We did not look at any of the CS HTML files. So let's do that. We want the CS HTML for student. Look what got built for us. All right. Create, delete, details, edit, index. These 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 files. Create, hopefully, is self-explanatory. Right? Create a new record. Delete an existing record. Details, show us an existing record. All right? Index usually will show all the records. All right? Or as many as will fit on a screen. And edit will allow us to edit an existing record. So if we look at these, create, there's the beginning of the form, and it's showing you exactly what it's going to look like. All right? Now, when you start going through this, just so you know, it's not mandatory that this shows you every single field. Or some fields might say hidden. You typically don't want to show a customer or a student type of thing. You know what your BTC, your Rankin ID is, but if there's another number that Rankin uses for you, they don't want you to see that. They don't want, especially don't want other people to see that. All right? Again, with the delete, same kind of thing. You've seen this before. When it says display name 4, those are text boxes. and then inside of a for each typically, but it doesn't have to be. All right. If it's just to delete a certain record, that was all the headings. This is the information, the actual deletion. So on 24 and 25, all right, they show you that. On 26, they've got a for each loop. I believe that's an index. What is that doing? Does it make sense to everyone? I'm asking you this. The code that you see here is going to create labels. One that says last name, one that says first mid name, one that says enrollment date. The code down here is going to loop through the entire database and show you every student we have in there, or again, as many as can be shown on one screen, and it will show us their last name, followed by their first mid name, followed by their whatever it was, enrollment date, or whatever the heck enrollment date. So I'm going to do a file save all, and I'm going to just go to the index here and tell it to view it in the browser. All right, I'm getting an error. Cannot find or load ContosoUniversity or one of its dependencies. I can tell you what that error is. The error is when I created this, on a couple of occasions, I used ContosoUniv, and on a couple of other occasions, I used ContosoUniversity. I'm going to have to go back and fix those. That's my error. So it says here, it's having a problem in IO file not found exception. All right, so I'll have to go back and change that. I really wish it would have worked, so I could have shown you and we could have run through everything, but since I screwed up, it didn't. All right, I'll try to fix that by no later than tomorrow when we continue with this. Let's finish this section up. So the author says, what we could have done if it had worked, click on the Students tab to see the test data that we put in with the seed method. And we should have then, what they're saying here is, remember this is responsive, but if it's too big and you don't see everything, you might have to stretch it out a little bit or click on the hamburger menu and then click Students. All right. Finally, view the database. I'm on page 28 here, and the author says, when you ran the students page and the application tried to access the database, the entity framework discovered there was no database. So the entity framework created a database. It then, as it says, ran the seed method, which put the data inside. All right? And it says, if yours did work, this is what I want to show you. Please look up on the screen. I don't care that mine didn't work. All right? But when you click View, you can choose either Server Explorer or SQL Server Object Explorer, and you should be able to find the database either way. That's what the author mentioned, so I will pick it up there tomorrow. When you do that, the author says you'll be able to go in and expand the tables to look at the schema, or open up the data tabs to look at the show data, table data tab to look at the data. All right. Finally, the last thing in this section I want to mention quickly, these conventions that the author talks about on page 28 to the top of page 29. All right. The author talks about in here, and they talk about certain conventions. Some of these we've already used. Notice, typically your table names will be pluralized. All right, typically the way that you set this up is every property or field name that you put into your class that's representing an entity will become a table field name. All right. As mentioned previously, you can call your primary key either ID or the name of the class followed by ID with no space. Either way, it's recognized as the primary key. As it says, a property is interpreted as a foreign key if it's got that navigation property with it that we saw earlier. All right. So it says you can also override these conventions if you want to or need to. Now, when I started on this, I downloaded the completed project and it didn't work. Feel free to do it and take a look at it and see if yours works. Mine did not. So, as mentioned here, what was done so far, we created an MVC web app. We played a little bit with the style. We installed the Entity Framework 6. We created the data model, and we did it both by creating a data access layer, where that data access layer contains both our database context and our database initializer files. All right. We created our models, which had our three, for now, had our three classes in there, a class student.cs, a class course.cs, and a class enrollment.cs. All right. We set the entity framework up to use LocalDB. We created a new controller, a student controller, and we set it up so that it automatically, it was a student controller that was set up with the entity framework with read-write. So it built the views for us, and I was able to do all that except not view the database. I'm going to try to fix that now. So tomorrow I'm going to go on with this next part, implementing CRUD. What does that mean? That means we want to not only be able to work with students, all right, we want to be able to work with students, and we want to be able to work with courses, and we want to be able to work with enrollments. All right, so I will pick it up there tomorrow. And again, if you say, well, then what are we supposed to do? Start reading this. All right, and if you're like, well, I don't want to do that, then start looking at your book. All right, because either Friday of this week or next Monday, we will be going over Chapter 7 of the book and beginning to create the sports store project as a class. There will not be a test on this stuff that you're doing now, but I am going to ask that you turn in what you've done. Not this minute, but when we get all done. All right, does that make sense? That's how you're going to be graded. Questions? Yeah, I'm still working on getting this stuff to work for the GitHub Classroom. But yeah, what I'll have to do is when I come in here tomorrow, I'll come in and I'll bring in a flash drive, and I'll have each one of your names on it. You can drag your chapter 4, 5, 3, 4, 5, whatever it is, just drag your projects onto there. All right? For right now, I'm more concerned with looking at the code anyway. Other questions? All right, the rest of the period then is yours.